morning. As I scroll through news feeds each day on screens or watch the evening news, there's a lot of pain and suffering in our world. There's a lot of stories of suffering and warfare and persecution, of domestic violence, of vulnerable people hurting, of people starving or people fleeing war zones, refugees, Indigenous peoples across the world seeking a place to belong, a home, a restitution of culture and language and place. We see many people in our world struggling with life, and there's much injustice. The flourishing of evil and injustice is there, as is the flourishing of good in other places. But when suffering and pain touches us deeply, or we're moved by the story of someone we hear or know, the questions of good and evil, suffering, why me, arise. Why do bad things happen to good people? Why do the evil seem to flourish? Why does Vladimir Putin allowed to go on his merry way of war and violence and murder and imprisonment of those he doesn't like? And the countless other stories of evil in our world. It was a question, I guess, that I asked 4 decades ago when my mum was diagnosed with ovarian cancer. And when you add into the questions of faith, God, why? Why mum? Why would mum, a good and generous, kind person, loving person, suffer? And yet there's evil people perpetrating evil who seem to flourish. Why her? God, why? Why her? These are deep questions and complex questions. And this week I'd like to ask, how do we live in a world where there is such suffering, where there is good and evil, where there's injustice, and where unjust people seem to flourish and innocent people seem to struggle? It's a question that was asked of the Israelites, the Jewish people in the 6th century BCE, way back. They held the view that if they did the right thing by God, if they worshipped, if they sacrificed, if they were good people, God would bless them and all would be well. If they did the wrong thing, if they did evil, God would curse them. That was it. Prosperity and blessing if you did the right thing, cursing if you did the wrong thing. And then suddenly in this time, the armies of King Nebuchadnezzar from Babylon came and waged war. They raged against the city and finally breached the city wall and flooded in, and there was warfare, and the city was destroyed, as was the wall around it and the temple. Many died, and the leading citizens and artisans and craftspeople were taken off, across the desert, back to Babylon, to live there and invest in their culture. And the people couldn't work out what to do, where they were. They were grief-stricken and struggling away from home. How do we live here? But there were deeper questions. What did we do wrong? Is our God Yahweh punishing us? Is that what this is all about? We've committed evil, but we've worshipped and sacrificed. What have we done? And others answer the question, well, maybe Yahweh, our God, is not that powerful because Marduk, the god of Babylon, must be more powerful because their army won. Others ask, well, maybe we're wrong all the time and Yahweh doesn't exist. There is no God. And then there are still others who want to ask the question, how do we live as God's people in the midst of suffering and change and the difficulties of life? How do we live with these questions in this world? And I think that's what I want to wrestle with, and I do wrestle with. How do we live in this world? And I think today we read or begin a journey with Job, the book of Job, that was written probably in this time. And it's a story created to ask some of these questions. Do good people inevitably just live a life that's blessed and prosperous? Or is there something deeper and more profound in life and mysterious and difficult? The story is set up in chapters 1 and 2 that are read this week. The heavenly council, there's the Satan, the prosecuting attorney of heaven, who brings the reports to God and asks the hard questions. Not the one with horns and red and whatever. And there's God receiving the questions and the reports. God, there's this guy down there called Job, and he's a man who's exemplary. He's good and just and righteous and holy, and he does all the right things. And his burnt offerings and sacrifices are there daily. You couldn't find a more proper, exemplary human being. And life's good for him. But I wonder, God, if you took everything away from him, would he still be faithful and righteous? And that's the question. That's the question that Job wants to wrestle with, but it's one of a deeper, profound sense of questioning. And God says, well, go for it. Let's test. And that's the story, the setup of the story. And so Job loses everything, his children, his home, his farm, his animals, his prosperity. He ends up on the rubbish dump with sores and illness. So pathetic that his wife says, oh, Job, just give up and die. I can't see you suffering. And then he has 4 friends, and the story unfolds with these 4 friends who come. And they hold to this traditional view. If you do the right thing, God will bless you. If you do the wrong thing, God will curse you. Job, what have you done wrong? You must have done something wrong, so confess it, admit it. Admit it before God and make a sacrifice and all be well again. And Job says, I did nothing wrong. And he holds to this line. And so the story unfolds. And over the next few weeks, we'll explore perhaps where that story ends. But today, how do we live? How do we live with this sense of injustice in the world? How do we live in a world that is hard and tough? And we hear the story of Mark continuing to go to Jerusalem. Jesus is journeying to Jerusalem. And he's now outside the city, outside the boundaries. He's on the outside. And that's where Jesus stands a lot of the time, outside, beyond the margins, with people who are there. He will be, in a few days or few weeks, he'll be outside the city on a cross. Today he's outside, and some religious leaders come and they ask him questions about divorce. It's a question to trick him and ensnare him. Is it right for a man to divorce his wife? In their culture, divorce for a man was easy. He wrote on a paper, I divorce you, took his wife before the elders, made his case, handed her the paper, and she was gone. She was out on the streets, perhaps with the children. No rights, no property, nothing. Desperate and dependent on whoever would take her in or care for her. Jesus doesn't condemn divorce in this story. I think perhaps recognising that sometimes divorce is the right thing. When there's violence and pain in the family, should they stay together? No. When 2 people fall apart and life together is actually diminishing both of them, divorce is probably proper. There are situations in which divorce is the right thing. But he makes the point that it is deep and difficult. It's a deeply spiritual wrenching apart. We should never take divorce lightly. And we need to stand with people and help in the healing process, because it's a wrenching situation where hopes and dreams and life is shattered and torn apart. But in this story, Jesus quotes from the Hebrew scriptures in Genesis 2, where it says, a man shall leave his father and mother, and a woman leave her home, and the 2 come together, no longer 2, but one. And he says they form a new thing. a new household, a new entity. Equal. The relationship is equal. It's not that the woman leaves and goes and is owned by the man. The two become one in an equal relationship. So, questioning the patriarchal, androcentric, male-centric view of the world, that only a male can divorce the woman. Why shouldn't a woman be able to leave her husband when he is doing the wrong thing, when he is evil, when he is violent? Jesus opens up the question of equality. And then there's children around who want to come to him, but the disciples are pushing them away. And he says, don't stop them, let them come to me. For such as these belongs the reign of God. If anyone wants to enter into the reign of God, you must become as a child. Not innocent and naive and all the other things, but you must become lowly. Children were those who had no rights, who were the lowest of the low, vulnerable. You must become one who sees through the eyes of a child, through the vulnerable, through the weak, through the marginalised, through the outcast, through those who are outside the boundaries. Learn to see through their eyes and open your heart to them and welcome them into your community, because when you welcome them, you welcome me. And build up a community of love that includes all people, where relationships are equal, not based on power or wealth or fame or anything else, but people who are equal, who share at the same table, where there's enough for everyone. Build up a community of love and of grace, because when you look into the eyes of others with love, you will see the face of God. And maybe that's part of the answer to this question. How do we live in a world that's unjust? Well, we reach out to those who are suffering. We reach out and we see in them the face of God. We reach out into a world that is difficult and where people are hurting, and we reach out and welcome them. And God is in that. And God is in this community that grows, the community of love and hope and peace and equality. God is there. The mystery of life, the wonder of God is in the midst of that. And love is part of the answer. When we live in this world of injustice and pain and suffering, we must learn to love and love deeply, profoundly, because God is in that love. God's not sitting in some heaven making decisions on people's lives from afar. God is in the midst of us, reaching out in love through us, changing the world as we change ourselves and as we open up and as we welcome others in. I think to live in this world of injustice is to learn to love others, and to welcome the least, and create a community of love and justice, equality, openness and hope. Amen.